Americans love the word smooth. We use it for whiskey the way we use nice for strangers. Safe, vague, and usually unearned. A pour feels gentle. We nod, and suddenly it's one of the smoothest I've ever had. But smooth to who? With ice, neat, or drowned in cola at a crowded bar? Today we're counting down 10 famous bottles Americans swear are smooth and asking a quieter question beneath the marketing. When you slow down, sip again and pour a second glass. Are they actually smooth or just easy? Number 10. Basil Hayden's Kentucky Straight Bourbon. Basil Hayden's enters this list the way it enters most conversations. Politely, softly, and without raising its voice. The bottle looks refined, the proof is friendly, and the first sip almost always earns the same reaction. Oh, that's easy. It doesn't rush you, doesn't bite, and doesn't challenge the palate right away. In a room full of louder bourbons, Basil Hayden's feels like the guest who waits for you to speak first. The reason so many people call this smooth has less to do with craftsmanship and more to do with subtraction. The alcohol heat is trimmed down. The spice is dialed back. The body is kept intentionally light. What's left is a bourbon that glides across the tongue without friction, but also without much weight. It doesn't offend, but it also doesn't linger long enough to make a statement. Where the illusion starts to thin is on the second sip. Not because anything goes wrong, but because nothing evolves. The vanilla shows, a little oak follows, then the finish steps aside quickly, almost apologetically. You realize the smoothness came from restraint, not from depth. The whiskey didn't melt into silk, it simply avoided edges. This is a bottle that performs best in social settings. A dinner pour, a guest pour, a bourbon for people who say they don't usually like whiskey. It succeeds beautifully at not scaring anyone. But in a ranking about smoothness that lasts beyond the first impression, Basil Hayden's lands here because sometimes smooth is just another word for thin. Hashtag 9 Crown Royal Deluxe. Crown Royal doesn't arrive quietly. It arrives wrapped in velvet, carrying decades of reputation and a promise most Americans already believe before they pour. For many drinkers, this is the definition of smooth whiskey. The bottle you recommend to friends who flinch at burn and distrust anything too bold. The first sip usually confirms the expectation. Soft sweetness, gentle entry, and no sharp corners. That softness, though, comes with a very specific personality. Crown Royal leans heavily into sweet, almost perfumed notes that feel designed to be comforting rather than complex. The texture is light, the edges are rounded, and the finish fades without protest. It's easy to drink in the same way a soft drink is easy to drink. Nothing pushes back. The moment you slow down, a different picture appears. The sweetness starts to feel uniform. The flavors repeat themselves. The whiskey becomes predictable very quickly. The smoothness remains, but the experience flattens. On a second glass, you're no longer discovering. You're just confirming what you already tasted. Crown Royal excels at being agreeable. In mixed drinks, at parties, or as a house pour, it performs exactly as expected. But in a ranking about smoothness as a quality of balance and integration, it lands here because it confuses softness with refinement. It's smooth the way background music is calming, pleasant, familiar, and rarely the reason you stay in the room. If you're enjoying this breakdown, tap like. It helps more than you think. And subscribe if you want the next rankings done the same way. Neat with ice and judged by the one test that matters most, the second pour. Hashtag 8 Jameson Original Irish Whiskey. Jameson is the whiskey that taught millions of Americans they could like whiskey at all. It's the default order at bars, the bottle at house parties, and the name people mention when they say, "I want something smooth." The first sip usually earns approval. Bright, clean, and friendly, with just enough warmth to remind you it's alcohol without making you brace. What makes Jameson interesting is how much its reputation depends on how it's consumed. Chilled, mixed, or taken quickly, it feels gentle and cooperative. The grain sweetness shows first, the spice waits its turn, and the finish disappears fast. In those settings, smooth is an accurate description. It behaves. Neat, though, Jameson tells a more complicated story. The pepper arrives sooner. The alcohol shows more clearly. The finish tightens instead of melting. It's not harsh, but it's no longer the velvet handshake people expect. The smoothness turns out to be situational, not structural. This is a whiskey that shines in motion, highballs, ginger beer, casual pours with friends. It's built for flow, not contemplation. Jameson earns its place here because it is genuinely smooth when treated lightly. But when you slow it down, you realize the reputation comes as much from ritual as from the liquid itself. Number 7. Gentleman Jack Tennessee. Whiskey, Gentleman Jack walks into this list carrying confidence. Double charcoal mellowed, extra filtered, marketed carefully as the smoother, more refined sibling. The first sip often justifies the pitch. The entry is calm, the burn is controlled, and the texture feels intentionally softened. For many drinkers, this is where smooth stops being a promise and starts being believable. But smoothness here is engineered, not organic. The sweetness arrives early, the oak follows gently, and the finish settles without drama. Everything is placed carefully in line, like furniture arranged by a professional. Nothing sticks out. Nothing challenges you. The whiskey behaves exactly as it was designed to behave. On the second pour, a faint dryness begins to show. Not unpleasant, but noticeable. The sweetness doesn't deepen and the structure doesn't grow. You realize the smoothness came from polishing, not from richness. It's refined, but not layered. Gentleman Jack belongs to a very specific category of smooth, the kind that makes people feel safe ordering neat in public. It earns this spot because it truly is smoother than most, but smooth enough to impress, not smooth enough to linger in memory. Number 6, Bulleit Bourbon. Bulleit usually earns the word smooth before anyone even finishes the sentence. It's everywhere, it's familiar, and it pours with the confidence of a bottle that knows it belongs on most bar shelves. The aroma feels clean, the first sip arrives without shock, and the texture gives just enough sweetness to make people relax their shoulders. In fast company, that's often all the evidence anyone needs. What complicates Bulleit is what happens after that calm opening. Mid-palate, the spice begins to stretch its legs. Not aggressively, not rudely, but clearly. Pepper, dry oak, and a sharper edge creep in where many drinkers expected silk. The whiskey doesn't turn rough, but it stops being gentle. The smoothness people praise is front-loaded, not sustained. Where Bulleit truly reveals itself is in pacing. Drink it quickly and it behaves. Sip it slowly and the structure becomes more angular. The finish lingers with more grip than memory suggests. You realize this is a whiskey built for motion, not meditation. Its balance favors cocktails, not quiet glasses. That design explains its reputation. In an old-fashioned, Bulleit becomes disciplined and composed. In a whiskey sour, the citrus tames its sharper instincts. In those roles, it feels refined. Neat, the story is different. The smoothness is conditional. Bulleit lands here because it's a bottle that teaches an important lesson. Some whiskeys feel smooth because they are. Others feel smooth because you rarely drink them in ways that expose their edges. Bulleit is honest, well-made, and extremely useful, but smooth only if you don't ask it to stand alone too long. Number 5, Maker's Mark. Maker's Mark arrives with a different kind of confidence. Not quiet, not restrained, but warm. The red wax, the soft proof, the aroma that leans immediately towards sweetness. It all signals comfort. The first sip usually confirms it. Round entry, gentle warmth, and a mouthfeel that feels padded rather than sharp. For many Americans, this is the bottle that proves bourbon doesn't have to hurt. What gives Makers its smooth reputation is not silence, but cushioning. The wheat in the mash bill softens the attack. The sweetness shows early. The alcohol tucks itself inside the flavor instead of sitting on top of it. Everything about the structure is designed to feel approachable. Where the conversation changes is in the middle. The sweetness grows heavier. The caramel thickens. The oak pushes forward more slowly, but persistently. Instead of silk, the texture becomes syrup. Not unpleasant, just dense. On a second glass, some palates start wishing for a little more lift. Maker's smoothness is real, but it's specific. It's the smoothness of warmth, not the smoothness of balance. The whiskey doesn't glide, it settles. It comforts rather than dances. For many drinkers, that's exactly the point. This bottle earns its place here because it shows how smoothness can come from generosity rather than precision. Makers doesn't avoid flavor. It embraces it, softens it, and lets it lean sweet. Smooth, yes, but in a way that eventually reminds you that softness and elegance are not always the same thing. Number 4, Woodford Reserve Distillers Select. Woodford Reserve enters the list dressed formally. Heavy bottle, deliberate branding, and a reputation built on polish. The aroma suggests oak and restraint. The first sip arrives controlled, almost architectural, with structure laid out neatly from start to finish. For many drinkers, this is what refined smooth is supposed to taste like. The entry is calm but not lazy. Vanilla and toasted wood take the lead, followed by a measured wave of spice. Nothing rushes. Nothing jumps out of line. The whiskey doesn't seduce, it conducts itself properly. That discipline is exactly why so many people call it smooth. Where Woodford becomes interesting is on the finish. The oak lingers, the dryness stays present, not harsh but firm. Instead of melting away, the whiskey stands its ground. For some palates, that reads as elegance. For others, it reads as tension. On the second pour, the character becomes clearer. This is not a soft whiskey, it's a controlled one. The smoothness comes from order, not from softness. Every element is placed deliberately, but none are padded. Woodford lands here because it represents a different interpretation of smooth. Not sweet, not light, not forgiving, but composed. It's the kind of whiskey that behaves well in a tasting room and rewards slow attention. Smooth, yes, but smooth in a tailored suit, not in a velvet robe. Number 3, Buffalo Trace Bourbon. Buffalo Trace enters this countdown with more expectations than almost any bottle on the shelf. Its reputation precedes it. People recommend it with certainty, bars treat it like a benchmark, and online discussions often describe it as dangerously smooth. The first sip usually supports the myth. Sweet corn, soft caramel, and a rounded entry that doesn't flinch. It feels welcoming in a way that makes people nod before they even finish swallowing. What makes Buffalo Trace fascinating is how carefully it balances familiarity and ambition. The sweetness shows early, the oak follows gently, and the spice stays in the background just long enough to avoid alarming anyone. It tastes like bourbon designed to win friends quickly. Nothing is sharp, nothing feels rushed. It behaves like a host who knows exactly how to make guests comfortable. The shift happens as the glass empties. Midway through, the warmth grows more visible. The spice edges closer. The finish lingers longer than expected, and not always as softly as memory suggests. It's not rough, but it's no longer invisible. The smoothness starts to depend on your tolerance rather than the whiskey's generosity. On a second pour, Buffalo Trace shows its true character. It's balanced, well-built, and genuinely enjoyable, but not uniformly gentle. Some sips glide. Others remind you that this is still a full-strength bourbon with opinions of its own. The legend begins to feel slightly inflated. Buffalo Trace earns this position because it is smooth often, but not always. It's a whiskey that teaches people what good bourbon can taste like, then quietly reveals that smoothness is not a constant state. It's a moment that comes and goes, depending on pace, palate, and patience. Number 2, Elijah Craig Small. Batch Elijah Craig doesn't introduce itself as smooth. It introduces itself as serious. The bottle looks weighty, the aroma leans deeper, and the first sip carries more authority than most whiskeys on this list. Yet within that strength, many drinkers find something they describe with surprising confidence. Control, not softness, not sweetness, but a kind of steadiness that makes the power feel contained. The entry arrives warm, not hot. Caramel, toasted oak, and baking spice unfold slowly, layered rather than stacked. The alcohol doesn't rush ahead of the flavor, it stays inside it. Instead of avoiding intensity, Elijah Craig manages it. That is where its smoothness lives. What separates this whiskey from most smooth bottles is how it behaves over time. The middle grows richer without becoming heavy. The finish lingers, but it fades cleanly. There's no sudden jab, no rough goodbye. It feels like a sentence that ends with a period instead of an exclamation point. On the second pour, Elijah Craig often improves. The palate adjusts, the balance becomes clearer, and the structure reveals itself more fully. You realize this is not smooth because it is gentle. It is smooth because it is integrated. This bottle ranks here because it redefines the word. It proves that smoothness does not require thinness or sweetness. It can come from discipline, proportion, and a finish that knows exactly when to leave. For many drinkers, this is the moment they realize what smooth was supposed to mean all along. Number 1. Four Roses. Small batch. Four Roses doesn't announce itself as smooth. It simply behaves that way. The aroma is balanced before it is expressive. The first sip arrives without ceremony, without sharpness, and without distraction. Everything is in proportion. Sweetness, spice, oak, and warmth share the space instead of competing for it. Nothing rushes, nothing lingers too long. What makes this whiskey extraordinary is how little it needs to hide. The entry is calm, the middle is structured, the finish fades without friction. There is no moment where you brace, no moment where you recover. The experience feels continuous, like a single movement rather than a sequence of sensations. Where Four Roses separates itself is consistency. First sip, third sip, last sip, each behaves the same way. No surprises, no spikes, no collapse. On a second pour, the smoothness deepens instead of thinning. The whiskey doesn't get louder, it gets clearer. This is not smooth because it is light. It is not smooth because it is sweet. It is smooth because every part of it agrees with every other part. The alcohol is where it should be. The spice knows its role. The oak never oversteps. Four Roses small batch earns the top spot because it doesn't confuse smooth with absence. It delivers presence without punishment. It proves that the highest form of smoothness is not silence. It is harmony. So here's the uncomfortable truth. Most smooth whiskeys aren't smooth at all. They're just easy to drink fast. Real smoothness shows up on the second glass, when nothing bites, nothing collapses, and the finish still behaves. If your favorite bottle didn't land where you expected, tell me why in the comments. And if you want the next ranking, budget smooth whiskeys, harsh overrated bottles, or blind taste tests, hit like, subscribe, and I'll build the next list around what you choose.